Did you know that mental health struggles are found all throughout the Bible? In this video, I'm going to highlight 7 different Bible characters who battled mental health challenges. So let's dive in. Now, let's be clear from the start that the Bible does not use the words mental health, mental illness, or mental health disorders, but there are words that are very similar to how many of us would describe mental health struggles, such as anxious, troubled, discouraged, dismayed, brokenhearted, despair, and so on. And you're going to want to stay to the end because the last Bible figure that we're going to discuss might surprise you. Here we go. Did you know that the Old Testament character Job struggled with his mental health? Job chapter 1, verses 1 through 3 tell us that he was an extremely influential and wealthy man. It says he was the greatest man among all the people of the East. But even with all his success, he feared God and shunned evil. And if you keep reading in chapter 1, you discover that Job lost his oxen, donkeys, camels, servants, and all of his children were tragically killed. That would easily qualify as the worst day of your life. And what's the first thing Job does after he receives this horrible news? Let's look at Job 1, verses 20 through 21. Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell to the ground and worshipped. And he said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Job shaved his head. Shaving one's head was a sign of mourning. He was grieving his loss. So we see grief. Let's think about what else is happening here. How would you respond if you received a call that your assets were destroyed and all your children were killed? If you're not a parent, then think about losing the people you love the most. Seriously, try to put yourself in Job's shoes. What would you be feeling? What kind of thoughts would you be thinking? What might be happening in your body? Grief, depression, obviously trauma, anxiety, probably thinking, what do I do now? Maybe feels like there's a 100-pound weight on his chest. In chapter 2 of Job, we see that Satan goes after his physical health and afflicts him with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. And this sends him into a deeper depressed state, and he ends up not speaking to anyone for 7 days. In Job 2:11 through 13, something beautiful happens though. 3 of Job's friends learn of all the evil that had come upon him, and they came together to show him sympathy and comfort him. It says, when they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him, and they raised their voices and wept. And they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads toward heaven. And they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. So God shows up for Job through the ministry of presence in the midst of his suffering. Now, if we were to keep reading, we'd find things go downhill. His friends start talking, and it's not helpful. They kind of start blaming him for his misfortune, and Job eventually calls them miserable comforters. But at least for a time, they were wise, kept their mouths shut, and provided some comfort to Job. Also, if we kept reading, we'd find Job questioning God and complaining to him, which illustrates that God is not afraid of your anger. He isn't scared of your frustration. He can take it. He's a big boy. So we can see that Job experienced grief, depression, trauma, and anxiety. We also see Job grieving rather than downplaying or dismissing his pain. And we see a faithful God who showed up in his life by providing comfort from the physical presence of his friends. Let's move to our next Bible character. Did you know that Elijah struggled with his mental health? Elijah was a man of God. He was a prophet. He performed miracles, like raising someone from the dead. So that's pretty cool. And during this time, the king of Israel was a man named Ahab, and Ahab's wife was Queen Jezebel. And Elijah had been used by God to defeat 450 evil prophets, and God had brought rain after a 3-year drought. So, after being used by God to perform some miraculous deeds, here's how Elijah feels. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, "So may the gods do to me and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." Then he was afraid, and he arose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, "It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers." Talk about mental health struggles. So, what's Elijah experiencing in this scene? He's afraid. He feels despair. He's even having suicidal thoughts. He prayed that he might die. "It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers." It's clear Elijah was not doing well. And how does God respond to Elijah? Let's keep reading verses 5 through 8. "And he lay down and slept under a broom tree. And behold, an angel touched him and said to him, 'Arise and eat.' And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, 'Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you.' And he arose and ate and drank and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God." I love how God doesn't rebuke Elijah for having strong emotions. God doesn't fix everything, but he meets the specific needs that Elijah had in that moment, which were food and rest. And those simple physical provisions probably helped give Elijah a better perspective on his situation and his life as a whole. Even in our darkest moments, God provides and comforts us. Not only does he help us see the big picture when we need it, but he also meets our needs, even if that just means taking a nap or having a snack like Elijah did in this story. Let's move on now to the next Bible figure. Did you know that King David struggled with his mental health? We know a lot about David's mental health struggles from the book of Psalms. And some of the Psalms are dark, like really dark. Check some of these out. "Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am languishing. Heal me, O Lord, for my bones are troubled. My soul also is greatly troubled, but you, O Lord, how long? Turn, O Lord, deliver my life. Save me for the sake of your steadfast love. For in death there is no remembrance of you. In Sheol, who will give you praise? I am weary with my moaning. Every night I flood my bed with tears. I drench my couch with my weeping. My eye wastes away because of grief. It grows weak because of all my foes." Or how about this one, verses 1 through 2 from Psalm 13? "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me?" But check out what David says a few verses later. "But I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me." So in these few verses, we see David having a soul greatly troubled. He felt weary. And I bet some of you watching this feel weary. David cried to the point of flooding his bed with tears because of his grief. He felt the Lord had forgotten him. He had sorrow in his heart. He wondered, he felt like maybe God was hiding from him. So David knew what it was like to be in the pit. And what we see in verses 5 and 6 of chapter 13 is that in the midst of his pain, he still chose to trust in God's steadfast love. Let's shift now to the next Bible figure. Did you know the Old Testament character Jonah struggled with his mental health? God called Jonah to go to the big city of Nineveh to tell them to repent and turn to God. But Jonah believed the Ninevites were his enemies and he doesn't want to go. So instead of being obedient to God and go to Nineveh, he boards a ship in the opposite direction to the city of Tarshish. And a raging sea storm hits while he's on the ship, and the crew throws Jonah overboard because he was the problem. He's then swallowed by a big fish, probably a massive whale of some kind, and he's in the belly of this whale for 3 days. And that obviously got Jonah's attention, and he repents to God for his disobedience, and the fish spits him up on dry land. He ends up making the 500-mile trip to Nineveh to get them to repent, and a great revival breaks out. But rather than being excited and grateful to God, Jonah actually pouts, and he's displeased that the Ninevites repented. He felt that they did not deserve God's mercy. Now, this is a wild story, right? But let's look at Jonah chapter 4, verses 1 through 4. It starts off with Jonah being displeased that the Ninevites repented. But it displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he was angry. And he prayed to the Lord and said, O Lord, is not this what I said when I was yet in my country? That is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish, for I knew that you were a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, and relenting from disaster. Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live. And the Lord said to him, Do you do well to be angry? So what was the state of Jonah's mental health here? Well, not good, right? He's angry. And what's beneath that anger? Probably his own self-righteousness, maybe what he believes is injustice. He's feeling despair, even suicidal. He prayed that he might die. Please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live. And if we kept reading to verse 8, we'd see that he asked God if he could die a second time. And in verse 9, he says that he's angry enough to die. And referring to this story, the anxious faith team said, maybe you haven't felt quite so angry as Jonah, but we've likely all reached a point in our lives where giving up felt easier than facing challenges, especially when we felt as though God was being unfair. We don't hear what happens to Jonah after his conversation with God. Maybe he repents of his anger and is able to celebrate that God is a God of second chances, or maybe he chooses to stay bitter and wrapped up in his own self-righteousness. We hope it's the former. When we face disappointment or we struggle with feeling like things aren't fair, how do we respond? Do we ask God to give us his heart to help us see things through his eyes? Because that is certainly the better way to respond. Let's look now at the next Bible figure. Did you know the Old Testament character Hannah struggled with her mental health? Hannah was the wife of a man named Elkanah. Most people believe she was his first wife, but because she was unable to bear children, he took a second wife. And this was actually a common practice in ancient Israel if a woman couldn't have children. Offspring, and in particular having a son to pass on the family name, was really important. Now, Elkanah's other wife had children, so Hannah was very grieved that she couldn't bear children. And because of her grief and also being taunted by the other wife for not being able to have children, she reached a breaking point. 1 Samuel 1 verses 10 through 11 says, In her deep anguish, Hannah prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly. And she made a vow, saying, Lord Almighty, if you will only look at your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. And then a few verses later, in parts of verses 15 and 16, Hannah is talking to Eli the priest and says, I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have been praying here out of my great anguish and grief. So what mental health struggles did Hannah have during this time in her life? Grief, immense grief, sadness, probably feeling hopeless, depressed, downhearted, discouraged, deep anguish, weeping bitterly, which is deep and intense grief and sorrow, often with loud, uncontrolled crying. She talks about her misery. She's prayed for years for a child. She's disappointed and I'm sure confused. And later in the story, we learn that God answers Hannah's prayer and gives her a son, and she names him Samuel. No doubt about it, Hannah was familiar with suffering. So if you're suffering right now, please know you are not alone. Hope and healing is always possible. Let's shift now to the next Bible figure. Did you know the Old Testament character Naomi struggled with her mental health? I took this straight from the website gotquestions.org to freshen our memory of Naomi, or to perhaps learn about her for the first time. The story of Naomi appears in the Bible in the book of Ruth. Naomi lived during the time of the judges. She was the wife of a man named Elimelech, and they lived in Bethlehem with their two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. Naomi's life illustrates the power of God to bring something good out of bitter circumstances. When a famine hits Judea, Elimelech and Naomi and their two boys relocate to Moab. There, their sons marry two Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. And after about 10 years, tragedy strikes. Elimelech dies, and both of Naomi's sons also die, leaving Naomi, Ruth, and Orpah widows. Now Naomi, hearing that the famine in Judea was over, decides to return home. And Orpah stays in Moab, but Ruth chooses to move to the land of Israel with Naomi. The book of Ruth is the story of Naomi and Ruth returning to Bethlehem, and how Ruth married a man named Boaz and bore a son, Obed, who became the grandfather of David and the ancestor of Jesus Christ. In part of Ruth 1, verses 13 through 14, Naomi says to her daughter-in-laws, "It is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. And a little later in verses 20 and 21, Naomi says this to the women of Bethlehem, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" So Naomi lost her husband, and both her sons died. That's about as awful as it gets. Try to put yourself in her shoes as much as you're able. What's she experiencing? What's her mental, emotional, and spiritual state? Obviously, she's experiencing deep grief, sadness, hopeless, depressed, downhearted, discouraged, afflicted, confused, despair. One thing is certain. Naomi knew pain. She knew what it was like to suffer with her mental health. So if you are suffering with your mental health right now, please know that you're not alone. Let's shift now to our last Bible figure. Did you know that Jesus experienced mental health struggles? It's true. Now, before I go any further, I want to be clear that I'm not saying Jesus was mentally ill. Not at all. But that doesn't mean that he did not experience mental and emotional struggles like us. The examples we're going to look at show us that Jesus was fully human. Yes, he was fully God, but he was also fully human and experienced pain and suffering like all of us. Let's look at a few different passages that give insight into some of the very painful experiences that Jesus had. The first is a prophecy written hundreds of years before Jesus lived, but it describes what he would experience on earth. It's Isaiah 53, verses 3 through 5. It says, "He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. Yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed." What about this one from Matthew 26, 36 through 39? "Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, 'Sit here while I go over there and pray.' He took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, 'My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me.' Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, 'My Father, if it is possible, May this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will. Here's how Luke describes this scene. He withdrew about a stone's throw beyond them, knelt down and prayed, Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. And being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. If those weren't convincing enough of Jesus experiencing mental health struggles, what about when he was hanging on the cross and in a loud voice cried out to his Father, my God, why have you forsaken me? You could argue that Jesus felt afraid because he would be without his Father soon. You could argue that he experienced anxiety, depression, immense stress, loneliness, anguish, and sorrow to the point of death. Troubled, forsaken, abandoned, sweat was like drops of blood. There's actually a medical term for sweating blood under extreme stress and anxiety called hematidrosis. I might be pronouncing that wrong, but the author Luke, who included this in his gospel, he would know because he was a physician, a doctor. He knew what he was talking about. And what do we see Jesus doing in his pain? What do we notice he did in the midst of his suffering? He sought his Father in a quiet place, and he reached out to friends to be with him and pray for him. And you know what? We can do the same. Jesus' experience of mental struggles should give us hope because guess what? God can handle our pain. He experienced the full range of human emotions. He was very familiar with suffering, and he's not afraid of your anger, anxiety, despair, depression, or shame. Go to him. He can take it. He wants to take it. I hope this video helped you realize that you're not alone in whatever difficulty you might be facing. You are not the first person to struggle with whatever it is you're going through right now. There are many men and women in the Bible who face mental health challenges, and so your experience has been experienced before, and I want you to know that God is with you and that He is for you. What Bible figure did you resonate most with from this video? Whose story inspired you or spoke to you? What's a Bible passage that maybe you turn to for comfort or hope when you're walking through the valley? I would love for you to share it below in the comments. I would love to read it. Thank you so much for watching, guys. And if you like what I'm doing, then please hit that subscribe button and bell icon. And feel free to check out my website, themindofchrist.info, to learn more and get involved in what I'm doing. Take care.